I am so glad that you all are able to be here today. This is Surge and Marin County Free Library's second video in the series, second program in the series, Race and Poverty in the United States. The second in the series is Defining Poverty in Marin. My name is Rashida Scar. I am a librarian here at South Novato Library, and we are so glad that you are here with us today. I am going to do a little housekeeping. I'm going to introduce our speakers, but once we've done that, we'll get started with our program. So as I said, today we're doing Defining Poverty in Marin. Next, I want to put a plug in for our next program in the series, which is Systems that Reinforce Poverty. And we're going to be looking specifically at things like student loans, debt, home ownership, low wages and underemployment. Those are things that we're going to be looking at for our next program. So be aware of that and keep your eyes out for that. We do have a book list for this program, and we will share the link with you for those book lists. Really powerful, impactful reading that can help inform some of the conversations that we're going to have here today. So we do encourage you to check that out. And for that, I'm going to introduce our speakers today, our panelists today. First, we have Amber Allen Pearson. I'm going to spotlight Amber. Thank you. It's good to meet you, Amber. It's good to have you on our program today, Amber. Amber is a activist. She is a artist. She's a poet. She is somebody who's been working in the Marin community for a long time, fighting for equality, fighting for healing, fighting for justice, and we appreciate having her on with us today. And she's going to share a little bit about the documentary that she is working on called Clarity. And I will allow her to share more about that documentary. We're going to be watching the preview trailer for that today as part of our film portion. The next person I want to introduce is Tara Evans. She is a historical archaeologist whose work focuses mainly on the transatlantic slave trade and the systems of oppression, mostly meted out to the African diaspora here in the United States and abroad. And her work is just fascinating, and we're excited to have Tara on with us today as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Lisa, to Barbara, who's going to share a little bit about Surge Marin. So we're going to introduce ourselves now, and I should introduce my other partners as well. Lisa Bennett, who is with Surge Marin. I have Barbara Kaler, who is here. She's also with Surge Marin. And I have Chelsea Supawit, who is with Surge Marin as well. And they're going to get a chance to speak to you now. But I'm going to hand it over to Barbara, who's going to share a little bit about Surge.
Thanks, Rashida. So Surge stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice. And it's so Surge is a national network of groups and individuals that was founded back in 2009. And it's a network of individuals and groups that organize white-bodied people for racial and economic justice. And Surge Marin is the local chapter of that national organization, and it was founded in 2017. Since 2017, Surge has been teaching workshops to educate white folks about the persistent impacts of racism, often that go unnoticed and seem to be invisible to us white folks. One of the workshops that's coming up is talking with kids about race and racism. That's coming up next week. Another thing that Surge Marin does is it mobilizes folks to show up at local governmental meetings to fight for things like equitable housing, to fight for the end of police violence against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people that live here in Marin and across California. And there's an action hour every Monday from 12 to 1. Then we do things like contacting state and federal elected officials on the need for equitable laws and policies. We support work of local organizations that are led by leaders of color and that are serving communities of color here in Marin, like the Multicultural Center of Marin, MC Arts and Culture, and the Marin County Cooperation Team. And in order to make the changes that are needed in Marin County, more of us white folks need to understand that the Black, Brown, and Indigenous vision for changes in this country, in this county, are exactly what we all need for all of us. And there is a website, the Surge Marin website gives details on these events and gives direct actions that can be taken, gives information on how to be an organizer, how to donate resources, how to get the weekly newsletter. And in closing, I just want to give a quote from Anne Braden, who was a white-bodied Southern civil rights leader she lived between 1924 to 2006. And she was also a white anti-racist activist. She said in regards to white people that we're not here because we're helping Black people or other people of color. We're here because our lives too depend on us getting into this fight. So I think that's it. Thank you, Rashida. And I should say that my name is Barbara and I volunteer for Surge for about 3 years now. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Barbara. Next, I'm going to have Lisa come on. Lisa is going to share our land acknowledgement, and she's going to highlight an organization here in Marin that is working specifically with Indigenous folks, Indigenous residents here. Lisa?
Thank you. I wrote this poem inspired by Amber, whose writings, as we were preparing for this webinar, she shared something she had written, and it so inspired me to write a land acknowledgement as a poem, especially on Earth Day, right? A land acknowledgement is a way for us to begin our work together, grounded literally in the ground, and appreciating what has happened before us and the work that we need to do together. So here we go. A blessing for the earth on Earth Day. Forgive us, Mother, for forgetting you, for forgetting your rhythms, your tempo, your wisdom, for forgetting your grace and fire, your floods, your storms, your rage, your thunder and serenity. Forgive us for remembering you only when we need to heal, and for then returning to the harm we do. Forgive us for being made of you, by you, and for falling away from you. Forgive us for forgetting the first people who understood your rhythms, your tempo, your wisdom, whose remembrances are held not in our books, but in your very breath. That's my land acknowledgement.
Thank you.
And I want to talk about grounding. I'm going to be very specific about an organization that I think we should all support. The Indigenous Healing Center, which officially launched in July 2021, emerged with the support of community members and organizations throughout Marin County in response to the needs of Indigenous families and communities, and working alongside the Native organizations already established in Marin. The IHC is focusing on supporting Indigenous medicine practitioners and Indigenous health promoters, community health workers. IHC offers health and healing services, education and training, all from an Indigenous worldview. The Indigenous Healing Center's priorities populations are indigenous families, individuals, and communities in the County of Marin, including the large concentrations of indigenous peoples from the South who come from diverse and intertribal cultures, including Central and Southern Mexico. And we'll send the link to their center in a follow-up email. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We always want to ensure that our land acknowledgements are not merely acknowledgements that we are on the land, but an acknowledgement that we need to support and to lift up these communities that are still here. They never left. They are still taking care of the land. They are still teaching us, and we still need to make sure that their communities are cared for. And so we always encourage people to support these organizations that are caring for the indigenous people who live amongst us. So thank you for that, Lisa. To give you a sense of how today is going to go, we're going to show a few short films, and after those films are done, we will open up the conversation with our panelists. If you have questions during the films, during the conversation, feel free to pop those into chat. We are collecting those questions, those comments, and we will explore them at the end. We always leave time at the end to talk about some of those questions that end up in the chat. So don't be shy. Without further ado, we would like to start the first film, which is The Legacy of Housing Discrimination in the Bay Area Explained. And we want to thank Amber for sharing that preview with us. It is unreleased, and we're going to give you opportunities to help support the making of this important story, this important Marin County story that needs to be told. And we'll do that later on in the program. But for now, we would like to bring on our panelists and begin to start opening up the discussion. So I would like to start, sorry, getting my notes here together. I would like to start with Amber. Amber, can you share a little bit, introduce yourself and share a little bit about the work you're doing? How'd you get into it? And just what you would like to present to the people today.
Yes, Rashida, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to come and be a part of this. I am really honored to be on this panel with Tara. I'm particularly honored to just have all the conversations that I've been able to have with you all building up to this. The film itself, in terms of what I do, everything I possibly can to muscle some change, to muscle some conversation, to muscle some healing, in this county, but especially for children, with a deep focus on Black children. I support all children, but how I got started working here was through the youth in Marin City. I'm a poet. I was invited to teach poetry to some of the youth in Marin City. This was circa 2011, and this was before I thought of myself as a poet. But in that time, I fell in love with what it means to empower children. And so teaching poetry turned into teaching literacy, turned into teaching empowerment. And I've done that for over a decade now, and it's grown into a million different things, because what I realized after about 5, 6, 7, I don't even know how many years, is that no matter what I did, which I did a lot, like I created youth programs where we had councils, we had leadership training. I took several groups, over 50 girls, to both Kenya and Tanzania, with programs specifically developed around the idea of creating global identities as women and how much we're central to the communities that we create. I did all of these things and it didn't matter. no matter what I did, when the students that I worked with transferred out of the Sausalito Marin City School District into the TAM district, they were destroyed by the white culture around, over and over and over again. And so including my own child, I have a now 22-year-old son who grew up here in the Mill Valley School District, and I watched him be unseen, I watched him be stereotyped, and I watched how he internalized that. And as a mother, it was really hard to access, especially with teenagers, those places by the time they're there, to try to empower them and let them know that these are aesthetics. So a lot of my work has been focused on that. I've also had a really big interest in healthcare. And so I've run health clinics, I've built programs around food. All of the issues, those videos that you brought up were great. All of the issues, I was kind of like an octopus trying to tackle all of them, you know, in whatever creative way I could find. I kind of consider myself a response team. And my activism, which is accidental, it wasn't something I intended. I didn't intend to be an activist. Even in the scenes from the movie where I'm like leading protests, those were all youth organized protests where they asked me to come speak. I didn't organize those. I support youth. That's what I do. So all of my activism or being spotlighted as an activist is accidental. And however, during that time, I was linked up with some directors who recognized that because of my biracialism, because of the way that I have traversed between Marin and Oakland, which was also what a great documentary, thank you for showing and highlighting some of the issues that are there. And because of the way I think in my experience, all of these issues can be seen through my life experience and through the work that I do in a nuanced way. Because one of the bigger challenges with approaching these conversations in Marin is we think nobody's being killed. We think, which by the way, isn't true. We have stories just like George Floyd in Marin City, but there's such an ability to be separated from it in the surrounding area of Marin County that without those extreme situations, we don't think it's something that we have to deal with.
Absolutely.
But I've got all the stories. I have all the stories of all the ways that we are dealing with that our children are dealing with that exists here in a very, very, very pervasive way. And through my own attempt at finding belonging, I've been now in Marin County this round for 21 years. And in that search for belonging, I have discovered language to have conversations about what I'm calling nuanced or quiet racism, which is what lives here. We have some of the language. We can hear things like microaggressions. We know that it exists, but I have language, I have ideas, I have concepts. And as well as there's a part of the movie that is going to go into a bigger look, not just Marin County, which is that at the point that we've been making the film, I have contemplated over and over again, do I even want to be here? As every person of color does, because it is a hostile environment. And so in that, if I don't belong here, where do I belong? I have started to do a heritage journey to look for where I belong. I've traveled to Louisiana, which is on my patriarchal side, the plantation that my grandmother was a slave on, and began to have conversations with some of the families that are descendants of the people that owned her, as well as families that were kin to me that I didn't know. I traveled to Ghana, where part of my bloodline is, and where there's a huge history because of the forts and the dungeons that held and captured African people before being transported in the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm currently on a mission to go and explore my mother's side, which is the exact opposite. It is my mother's family are racist, declarative racist white people who banned my mother from her childhood home because of her love of diversity and love of Black men and her husband. And so in that search for belonging, I have a bigger narrative to include around belonging anyways, because that search has led me to absolutely change the definition of belonging, which I initially thought meant that it had to be surrounded by people who look like you, who had the same culture of you as you. And that it's about being witnessed. It's about being validated. Belonging, you don't have to look like somebody. But this county is constantly not disvalidating people of color. It's making Black people of color invisible. It is harming them. And so, so I have language, and when the film comes out, there will be a curriculum, and I'm hoping to travel and deepen the dialogue around these harms, along with some of the ideas that I have about change that's possible, in a way that allows that conversation to further, because I don't think that we're there. And one of the challenges that I'm having right now with where we are in the state of this conversation is that 2 years ago, when George Floyd was killed and we were all sitting at home, everybody was activated. They were shocked and aware there was something that shifted. And so everybody, used systems and tried to put in place things that they expected to be able to make change. We're 2 years in, and now the backlash of that is everybody's like, diversity, equity, and inclusion teams, you haven't fixed this? Shame on you. Shame on you. You got it wrong. So there's this backlash on people who've been doing the work for 2 years, as if in 2 years we're going to fix what's been 400 years of a problem.
Absolutely.
And so my goal is to deepen the conversation so we can find healing.
Thank you so much. That is, and I would love to go into that more with you as we go through the program. The next panelist I would like to introduce is Tara Evans. Tara, thank you for being here with us. What we're going to do is, I'm going to ask you the same questions. Please introduce yourself and let us know about the work that you're doing and how you got into it. Share that with us, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashida, and thank you for asking me to come here today and speak with our Marin community and those beyond who see this video. It's really an honor to be on this panel with you, Amber, and Rashida and Lisa. I'm very grateful for this moment. My background, or I'll start with what I'm currently doing. I'm currently working I'm a working member on the AB 1185 working group for the implementation of that ordinance in Marin County, which is for sheriff oversight. I also am part of a larger grassroots coalition that is working on justice for Mateo in San Rafael, and showing up in some larger and smaller spaces across this county to really confront and dismantle the variety of ways that we see the leadership in this county continuing to implement what I will discuss probably later as the colonial mindset and the shaping of the effects of transgenerational colonialism in our county. I came to this really from a childhood of two different kinds of immigrants. My father's family came here 5 generations ago, fleeing the persecution of his ethnicity. He's Ashkenazi Jewish. I'm a first generation mixed Jewish individual. When they came to San Francisco, they actually lived in the Excelsior district, which was yellow. And it was all the way through my grandmother that they were not considered white. On her birth certificate, actually, it shows her as other. On my mother's side, she's British, came here in the 1960s, came to San Francisco. And one of the things I felt in my childhood was that, or I learned, was that my grandparents really were colonizers. They were born in England and they moved to South Africa, and they had servants that were South African people. I grew up in a very racist household. And I think that I also, living in Marin County, felt very, it felt very wrong inside of myself. I can't tell you exactly what it is that triggered that, but from a very young age, I was asking questions, and I was looking around me at the Latino people in San Rafael who had moved there in the 80s. I was part of, I'm dating myself, but I was part of that group of people who witnessed the influx of Latino immigrants into Santa Fe. And this really, I felt this through my childhood going to school in Marin County. I saw my friends treated differently that were people of color, people from Marin City. You know, there was a difference in the way we were allowed to move through the county, being pulled over by police officers, being in cars of people of color and seeing the way they were treated. And it was different than my own self. And I always felt that something was wrong. And I left home very young. I left home when I was 16 to travel around the world and to see more people, because everybody around me was kind of like a homogenized slice of pie in a way, you know, and I just knew that something wasn't right. And so after traveling around, I came back to Marin County at the age of 23, and I went to College of Marin. I had a history teacher named Walter Turner who really ripped my eyes open, and I read a book that was very important about all the lies my history teacher taught me. And we really deconstructed, Hugh was able to really deconstruct a lot of and articulate a lot of that that propaganda that's fed to us in a classroom. I realize now that a classroom is sometimes the last place to get the historical truth. And I just think it's so important to recognize that concept, because once we understand that from that plateau, we're able to not instantly, but hopefully to a certain extent, shift our mindset and start doing that deep dive into what is the information that I'm trying to seek? Why did it feel incorrect? And that quest led me to UC Berkeley, where I eventually studied archaeology. I became a historical archaeologist that worked on transatlantic slave trade material culture. I studied and excavated a plantation in Louisiana with my professor, Dr. Lori Wilkie. There I read a couple books that really, again, blew my mind open and started to give me the language to articulate what we're talking about today. Two of those books I really recommend are called In Small Things Forgotten by Dr. Dietz, and also Lori Wilkie's book on the archaeology of mothering. From there, I went to grad school in England. I actually went to the University of Bristol, specifically choosing that school because Bristol is the place where a large quantity of brass was produced and then transported into Ghana. And this led me to excavating and working and doing my research at Elmina and the Cape Coast Castle. So it's amazing what aligns Amber and I in a way, because it's like we've been living this parallel path that's taken us on this global journey of discovery and self-discovery and looking for these truths that make sense to us and also allow us the language, or I don't want to speak for you, but I'll speak for me, that gives me the language to be able to have these conversations and find my own personal sense of purpose. And also be able to bring it now into a social justice sense in Marin County, and to work as an activist and community organizer. I think that colonial shapes our everyday public policy making in Marin. And I think it's also really important to think about more specifically how that policy making affects the outcomes for the residents of color in Marin. And really looking at what those transgenerational effects of colonialism are right here, right now in the present.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tara. And we're going to keep going through questions, and we're going to touch on all of these things again. So the next question I would like to ask, and just from your perspective, from your various explorations, you guys are both explorers, amazing explorers, and you have really plumbed the depths of a lot of these issues. What do you think is the root cause of Marin's racial disparities, particularly how they relate to poverty? And Amber, I'm going to start with you.
That is not a small question.
It is not. But we can chip away at it. So if you want to start, that would be.
Yeah, I think that the answer for Marin is going to be the answer for the entire country, for the entire Western Hemisphere, for the Americas in general, is greed. That the foundation of this country, everything that has been built was built on the idea of division, on the capitalizing of division, on taking a body and identifying it as the less than. And that is both in racism, sexism, that's even in the marketing of clothes we wear. I mean, it's literally seeped into everything, the idea that of othering and the idea of also creating this exclusivity as a goal, the individual and the capitalism, this idea that we individually, and Marin, the things that happen in history, because my understanding of Marin's history, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, is originally this was a getaway for wealthy San Francisco people who just wanted to escape city life. There was actually not even originally. Originally there was agriculture and there were indigenous people here. The people who lived here were actually more urban. And then it became a getaway for San Francisco wealthy people. And once that exclusivity started to build in and the World War II ships started to happen, everything became a lot more exclusive. And all of those engineered lines that defined this neighborhood is this and this neighborhood is that allowed for something in Marin County that I think it really has a stronghold in other parts of the country too, and other parts of the state and even the Bay Area, but not as blatantly as it does in Marin County, which is the level of homogeny. Marin County being, what is it? I think 70% Caucasian. I think it's something like that. It's higher. Higher. Means that there's no reproach, because if without diversity, if you look to your left and you look to your right and everybody looks like you and behaves like you, there's nothing to educate you on growth or on what other people experience, on the empathy that it takes to relate. And so it has created this. Marin notoriously is known for its stuck up, for its nature as being this kind of haughty-taughty place, but who's going to reproach it? Who's gonna do anything about that? And it has also really crippled some of the communities here. And I would say particularly Marin City. A lot of people like to take Marin City and compare it to the canal. I don't think that's a really fair approach, only because in terms of numbers, since a lot of our work, when we look at statistic, is based on numbers, the demographics of Marin City are so much stronger than the canal. Even though they're separate issues, the issues don't compare. They're not a fair comparison. Just because skin color doesn't mean that the issues compare. I actually like to compare Marin City more to West Marin, where the numbers are also really small and where people are often really, really neglected, and in a way that is also hard to reproach, because having done so much work in Marin City, when people assume when you work in Marin County, even if you're working on programming that if it needs certain assistance, if I applied, for example, for support, for resources outside of Marin County, other providers, resources, grants, partners often look at it like, you live in Marin County, you don't need the help. So we don't get that support, which puts a really unfair positioning between Marin County, which gets to go ahead and support and run and set expectations for programs and communities that they have no understanding of, because of that division, because there's no relationship. Even when you talk to people in Marin County about Marin City, it's discussed as a separate limb, as if it isn't a part of Marin County, as if the people that belong there are not beholden to this county, which they are. So I know I got a little bit off track, but the bottom line is that it's greed. The system is entirely designed to benefit the people. Just like you showed in the video, right now, if we've created an economy that says that this is red and this is bad and this is green and this is good, to keep those two things separate, we've created a system that makes it a benefit to have everything segregated the way that it is. And we haven't done enough work to dismantle those historic and foundational things that exist in this county and in this country.
And by extension, to disinvest from those red communities and continue compiling and compounding the investment in these green communities. So when we ask, why are the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, the answer is there, and it's geographical, it's racial, and it's intentional. And that's something that I really want to explore a little bit more. I'm going to ask the same question of you, Tara. What do you think, if you were to name out a root cause of where we are with Marin as far as racial disparities in terms of poverty, what would you say is a root cause?
Sorry, my computer just fell.
It's okay.
Well, you know, I have to go again back to the colonial mindset and looking at it. I agree fully with Amber in terms of greed. Greed is the basis of colonialism in its sense. You know, colonialism is the commodification of African people and indigenous peoples around the world for the thievery and the raping of the resources of the land that they sit on. Mm-hmm. So when I refer specifically to the colonial mindset, I'm really talking about that lingering impact that the value, and it's a philosophy that goes, that's coupled with that concept of greed. And that is the impact that the values, the culture, the policy making of the ruling class, the education of them, their way of being is inherently superior to the indigenous people whose land that the colonizers have occupied and continue to occupy. Mm-hmm. So I think that the racial oppression of that, including the piece that it is actually internalized by people of color, mm-hmm. that this has to be a part of being a have, of experiencing success, that you need to dress like, speak like, right. Get educated like, believe in the religion of, look like those white people or those European people, those descendants of the European people that have oppressed you. And in anthropological terms, we call that cultural imposition of the colonizers and cultural disintegration of the colonized. And so, I mean, when I think about that and how do I apply that specifically to Marin, I mean, I first have to acknowledge that, you know, poverty isn't spontaneous. I know I've said that to you before. It's a really premeditated practice, yeah. That's born 4 centuries plus ago. There's a huge difference between the colonialism that we talk about and the enslavement of African people and indigenous people from the 1400s to the present versus in the ancient, you know, in ancient civilizations. And it's often used as a way of almost dirtying the picture when we talk about colonialism. So I really do want to separate that out for your viewers. Mm-hmm. I think it's super important for Marin County to talk about and acknowledge the initial colonization of the county. And that was done by a colonizer, Don Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, who killed and enslaved the Native American people in the communities who were living here on the Marin geographical location on this landscape in the early 19th century. That's not discussed when you look at the origin of Marin. That's something that's a voice that's left out of the record specifically. And I think that, you know, root cause, I don't know if there's just one, but it's all kind of this bigger picture of what's happening at the macro perspective, and then how do we bring it down into Marin County. And I think since that time through the present, colonizers have and continue to occupy and exploit the geography of Marin. We see that in Golden Gate Village today. And I think that that very struggle to control the resource that is the land is coupled with the notion that those of European descent don't like. I don't personally use dominant subordinate because it infers a binary, but I think that those that inherently are superior thinking in their cultural values and norms, who have the ability to make the policies, to control the education, the home life, the spirituality, I think that it goes unacknowledged by our local leaders. And I think that if I look at root causes, acknowledgement, that's huge. What we need right now is we need our leaders to acknowledge that this is our history. And it's not only our history, it's our existence today.
Our present. Absolutely.
So for me, root cause is the lack of acknowledgement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. There's so much there that like you said, it's not a simple question. There's so much there I want to unpack. So I think I would like to drill down a little bit more with you, Tara, on that. So the videos we watched really do focus on how the wealth gap developed through redlining, but that's a very early picture of the wealth gap as it is appeared in Marin. And you mentioned a few things. But if we look at, kind of these macro things and how they relate to Marin specifically, we see that there's a pattern that develops. In our last program, we talked about how slavery of both Indigenous and African Africans was the startup money for this country. Like, this country would not exist if it were not for the enslavement of people. You have free labor, free resources because you stole it. Well, I mean, of course you'd be a successful country, but at what cost? What lingering effects? Can you speak a little bit more about Marin's colonial history? I know you mentioned it. Can you draw any direct lines between some of the patterns that were mentioned in some of those later examples of colonialism and some of the earlier examples of colonialism?
Sure. I mean, when I think about our colonial history and how that's impacted the patterns of wealth that we see today, what I'm really looking at is the exclusion of residents of color from the political process. I'm really looking at legally sanctioned segregation and discrimination in land, labor, and generational capital markers. And that specifically speaks to the ability to own a home, have a bank that gives you a mortgage, build your wealth, just like you saw in the video. The systemic, something I'm very close to, the systemic over-policing, the jailing and the deporting of Marin residents of color, and the fear and the trauma that not just the individual who walks through that experience, but their entire family feels.
Entire community.
I think that's a huge part of it. And that's what I mean when I say the intergenerationality of colonialism, because families inherit that. Families inherit the desire to want to be with people like them because they are traumatized and feel afraid to be around people who look like those that have oppressed them, and that's real. And we need to acknowledge that exists.
Absolutely.
I think also one of the things that I see is the reporting and publishing in the Marin Independent Journal. There's a lot of racially biased, borderline unethical, definitely not factual editorials that perpetuate the white fear that validates looking and turning away in Marin County. People repeat what they read and what they hear,
right?
Whether it's true or not. They're not doing their own sourcing of information. And so, And I also see a big issue with the fact that there's a lot of white people that aren't holding the county leadership positions accountable for actually acknowledging residents of color who have come forward and spoken their truth about these experiences.
Mhm.
You know, so to me, that's going to directly impact patterns of wealth that we see in communities of color in Marin. There, you know, I mean, there's just a few of the many. So I hope I'm drawing a through line there.
Absolutely. No, that's super important. And so Amber, I'm going to have you connect to that. So in the films we saw, the ways in which wealth has been purposefully kept from Marin residents of color, especially Black residents, especially Latino residents, especially Indigenous residents. As someone who has experienced that and who has kind of lived that history, how have you seen this play out in your experience, and some of the ways that your film touches on those experiences of deprivation and exclusion?
Mhm. Is living that, not
Living it. Yes, yes, yes. Present tense.
present tense. I think for me though, the most profound thing is with the children, and I'm going to piggyback off something that Tara was talking about in terms of the generations and what it is teaching them. And a lot of the dialogue in Marin County or about race is focused on how it is affecting Black, Brown, and Indigenous. And I do think that needs to be focused on, but I also, I want it to be clear that this is also affecting white children, and that white people are very, very sick, because when you have created a system where you are non-reproachable, there is no reproach. And Marin County has one of the highest rates for drug and alcohol abuse by teens in the nation,
Right.
Which, you know, having worked in wellness with youth on both, you know, in both areas, is coming from a culture, the wealth culture that is sick and repressed, and that where the children are trying to feel something, because there is no explanation for them about how they got to this status. When I worked at TAM in the Wellness Center, which focuses on the health, the mental health, the sexual health, and substance use and abuse with the teens at TAM, before we closed for the shelter in place, we were only in session for 7 months. And I did 9 5150s in that time. And that was not students of color. So the thing about it is that I'm a natural healer, but my ability to access those children was limited because they are defended. They already assume superiority to me in a way that makes it hard for me to access them. So this is killing everybody. It's just more blatantly killing. There are things that and this is what I mean when I talk about, you know, being able to deepen the language and to have conversation about these things, because even the conversations about white supremacy are often centered in white supremacy, assuming that we don't need to talk to white people about the way that this disease is living in them and in their communities. Just because they have a nice white picket fence or they have a big lawn or a big house does not mean this place has one of the highest rates of domestic violence. The fascinating thing, for the 21 years that I've lived here, I used to think it was me. The reason that I had such a hard time creating friends because there was something wrong with me. I mean, my son went to elementary school. I was a parent volunteer. I showed up for everything with what I knew, but I just had the hardest time relating to everybody because the conversations were about taxes or what $1,000 place you were going to send your kids for the summer. There just was nothing that made me feel like I could connect on equal grounds with anybody. So I stopped trying. And I've been very, very, very isolated in this county, which has had a huge effect on my ability to parent my Black son here. To not be a part of a community that you've lived in has effect. And that's me, that's my experience. So it's definitely the experience for the parents in Marin City also. But here's the thing about it, it's not me. Because just in the past few years, as I've taken on more clients, white people who want to have these conversations with me in a deeper way, as I make a few more friends, as people start to open up, I have not had a conversation with somebody who feels the same way, even if they're the person who's standing in the room talking about the taxes and where they're going to send their kids. Nobody feels connected here. So one of the deep impacts of this is the isolation and the separation, is this idea that there's anything different between us. That something that I'm experiencing isn't something you're experiencing, that something that these Marin City families are experiencing aren't something we are experiencing. There is no separation. And that's becoming more and more clear. That's the micro experience here in Marin, but that's showing up in the school shootings. Mm-hmm. You know, there has been violence in Black neighborhoods, Black and brown neighborhoods that have been unaddressed for a long time. As a matter of fact, not only unaddressed, but perpetuated.
Encouraged.
Encouraged, mm-hmm. Exploited through media. There has been, and it has been unaddressed. Now it's become a national issue. Same thing with drugs. When we had crack dropped into our communities in the 80s, nobody really wanted to talk about it. They wanted to blame the people. But now that we have an opioid crisis across the entire country that is affecting everybody, we want to talk about it with sympathy and with empathy, because there is no separation. The things that we inflict on anybody are going to affect all of us. And so a huge part of this conversation needs to stop being us begging white people to care about our problems. And it's not that I don't think that white people care, but if I look at this as a disease, which I do, for me, racism isn't a judgment. It's not a moral issue. We're talking about a literal development in the brain that over these centuries that we have had of intentional people capitalizing and creating methodologies and media, so much media around the idea of superiority and inferiority, it has literally created blockage in whiteness. Yeah. White people can be standing directly next to a Black body that is being harmed and not be able to see it. Mm-hmm. That isn't personal. That is happening in your brain.
Right.
So we have to restructure the brain and we have to rebuild the empathy. And that's going to take a lot of work. That's going to take a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation, a lot of vulnerability. That's not going to come though I think all the policy, I'm a big fan of lawsuits. I'm a big fan because we have no power. But right now it's like we're begging to be seen. Where is the power in that? That's still white supremacy.
Right.
I still have to ask you to care about the experience of my child or the children that I'm raising. That's still white supremacy.
Right.
It's so deeply seated here. It's really, really hard to address.
To speak to that point, because the points you're making are they're so pertinent to the ways in which poverty manifests itself. It's always a double-bladed knife. So whatever is inflicted upon a community, it is also inflicted upon, why can't we solve any of these problems? Why does this keep coming up? Hey, guess what? It's because when you're perpetuating you're perpetuating it for everyone, not just the people that you're inflicting these problems onto. There was a tweet that I saw once that was like, you know, if I'm studying primates and I notice that one primate in the community is hoarding all the resources, I would be like, okay, what's going on there? What's going on with that primate that's hoarding all the resources to the point that they're starving out other members of their community? But with us, we look at that and go like, man, that guy really knows how to manage his finances. You know, there is an issue when we have this accumulation of wealth to the detriment of the other humans living around you. That's a problem. That's an illness, as you say. And I think that drawing that out and saying, okay, it's not just about, you know, oh, they just can't get their stuff together and, oh, they have to beg us to care. No. It's about, there's something wrong with the whole system if there is a hoarding of resources allowed and perpetuated. And what's really troubling, and I think that was brought out by the first video, is how the government is perpetuating a lot of these this hoarding of resources. So a lot of this stuff has been allowed to happen. It's purposeful, it's intentional. And I think you're bringing that to the fore. So I would like to kind of begin maybe shifting towards, possible solutions. I know that we're not going to solve the problems here in our little 2-hour program. But Tara, can you share a little bit about how we could possibly use what has happened in the past to change courses for the future?
Yes, and I also would love to add one more thing, because I love and appreciate what Amber has said, because you've said it in a way that is so straightforward and clear for anybody to hear and understand. Right. And I think that one of the things that fuels the fire for me, that wakes me up every night and gives me the energy to go through each day, is really having that energy to talk with other white people, because white people have to really get on board and talk to each other about how do I decolonize my mind? Because that's what I practice each day. I don't think any of us, and I'm going to say us as in I'm part of a group of white people who experience Marin in a white way. I don't think any of us have asked ourselves each day, what is my agency, and where is my empathy, and how do I wake up each morning to be an anti-racist? Because it's not something that I can ever achieve, right? It's something that I am, and I am a part of. And I think that we have to really acknowledge and talk to each other about that, because you're right. It's not, this is happening to those people and we need to go help them. It's, this is happening to all of us. And what is my place and my part? And how am I going to decolonize my mind? And each day I ask myself, because I've been trained to look externally for my guidance. When I and others are faced with adversity, rather than really trusting my heart, how do I trust my heart and my soul, my mind? Where is my agency, and where is my empathy in this moment? And I think that, for me, like, I, as a white woman trying to use my life in a way that leaves this planet hopefully better for a society to be seen as whole and not us and them, and not colonized. I think that is one of the most important things that white people can ask themselves, their families, and each other. So I just wanted to add that to that part of the conversation. I think it's important to see people that you look like having those conversations too. So as far as, sorry, what was your question, Richie?
Yes.
Can you ask it one more time? Because
absolutely.
I was thinking about decolonizing my mind.
Yes, absolutely. And there's other questions I want to ask about that
Sure.
particularly, but this question is how can we use what has happened in the past to begin to change courses for Marin, to create a Marin that is economically just, where people have everything they need. Everyone has everything they need to live a healthy, safe, and enriched lives. Right.
I don't think there is like an answer. I think it's more about questions, and the questions you ask yourself each day. That's how I do it. I don't have an answer specifically. I have questions to respond to that. And that for me is, when I think about what's happening in Marin, I ask myself, how are myths about Marin's history, its residents of color, its white communities, and their cultures conflated? So I ask myself that question. I ask always when I look at these topics, whose voice and material things are missing? And who's the one that's speaking in that moment? I ask, how am I or we manifesting colonial beliefs and values in everyday interactions and challenging the way of thinking in Marin County?
Yeah.
You know, I think, and how are our leaders in Marin really embodying the colonial mindset from that definition I kind of gave earlier, you know? And my recommendation is really just to deep dive and have conversations with the people around you and not be afraid to speak up and speak out, even if you might say the wrong thing. I've definitely written the wrong things before. I've used words I wouldn't use today as I've learned more and listened more, because it never ends. You never really become anti-racist when you're white. Not if you're practicing self-awareness and reflection.
Yeah. How can you not be? You're steeped in it, you know, you're steeped in this. And I kind of wanted to ask a follow-up question. You mentioned some of the myths. What are some of the myths that have prevented Marin County from closely examining the ways this economic injustice? What do you think some of those myths are? Can we call those out?
Sure. I think some of the myths in Marin County are really how the land was acquired. I've written an op-ed about the mission of Santa Fe. I think the Archdiocese of San Francisco, I'm going to call them out right here, right now, is rewriting California history, and the mission system history and the enslavement of the Native American people. I think that there's a lot of myths surrounding Marin City that we spoke to today. You know, thinking that the problem is there, not here. I mean, that in itself is a conflation of the truth. So, you know, a lot of this is internal work.
Yeah.
For people like me, it's internal work. What are the myths I've been told about why an immigrant comes to this country?
Yeah.
You know, how many times have I heard from other white people in the same room as me when no other immigrants are there that they're taking your job?
Right.
Right? That's a myth.
It is.
So, I mean, there are so many. I'd be happy to post them somewhere.
Yeah.
To sit down and really reflect on that, because I mean, there are so many.
Yeah. And I think some of the videos that we looked at talked about it. And I do want to call out, because Amber, you mentioned earlier, and Amber, I have a question for you next. Amber, you mentioned how you prefer to, if you're wanting to be more apples to apples, compare Marin City to West County. The Latino population in that area is very different than the Latino population you find in the Canal, and the ways that wealth is communicated in those spaces is different than you see in the more urban areas of Marin County. And it is almost you can almost draw a direct line. I'm not even saying almost, you can draw a direct line between the missions, between the rancheros that were here when California was part of Mexico, and how that money passed from the church to Mexican landowners, and with the enslavement of indigenous people. And then it went to American landowners once we reclaimed the land that was never ours, and gave that out. So that you can almost draw a direct line between that early colonization. And then on the ranches to this day, you have indigenous folks, Latinx folks living on the land, working the land with landowners over them, who control every aspect of their existence. Their poverty and their experience in Marin County is dictated and looks very different than Latino and indigenous folks who live in the urban areas, and yet they're treated as one homogenous group, and again, disinvestment from all. So we want to look at that and talk about like some of those differences. But Amber, my question for you is, what are your thoughts about how we move forward? How do we, we know the problems. We can see the problems in Marin City. We can see the problems in the canal. We can see the problems in West County. What are ways that we can start to dig ourselves out of this mire, this colonialist mire that we have embedded ourselves in?
Okay.
I know that's a big question.
But I have the answers, or I have some ideas. I don't have the answers, but personally, what I'm doing is I do a lot of work with youth, knowing that when I'm old, the youth will be the ones, running this world. Both, I'm talking about them divisively because it's for the sake of the conversation, though I really do see all these babies as one. Mm-hmm. With my Black and Brown students, my work is to help them know themselves and create. I have a methodology, a practice of empowerment to help them create filters so that they can realize all of the systems that are in place to create the aesthetics they live in rather than internalizing it. Mm-hmm. Because I can talk about these things on policy and system levels, but my work is really in these personal narratives of these children who I hold, who literally have to walk down the halls at TAM or walk through the streets of Mill Valley for lunch to figure out what they're going to eat and what their body and their souls are experiencing. Mm-hmm. So that's one side. The other side is actually the white students who I find desperately want to get out from under the culture of their parents. There's many, many white students in Marin who a lot of students leave Marin immediately, like desperate, just like Tara was saying, desperate for more, like this doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. So I've been trying to approach them about creating language around that too, so that as they grow, but it's harder to approach them for two reasons. One is, it creates comfort. So even a lot of students I know go away and they come back and they default to what's comfortable and what's familiar, because that's natural. But the other thing is that they're very well protected. The idea of that white parents in Marin and at TAM make it really, really hard to approach them with agreed upon curriculum. And I find it to be, I'm concerned for my own safety around something like that. It's dangerous here because one thing that needs to be said about my work or any work for activists or people of color in this community is that when there's so many resources and so much power, it always puts me in danger of physically, but mostly of like being ostracized, being put out in a way that will make it hard for me to provide and take care of myself here.
Right.
So that's one thing, but I still approach it. So my focus is the youth. But I have a lot of vision and I call people to these visions because I don't have the capacity. But for me, Marin County is such an opportunity because it's now number 2 and was number 1 of what I call the most racist county in the state of California based on the race count study, that we meet where we have all the opportunity and the disparity based on that study, which I highly encourage everyone to check out.
I will add that to the book list.
Okay. We are very, very uniquely positioned. And I think there's a lot of shame in that. There's a lot of shame, and there should be, about those statistics, but there's a lot of opportunity. What if Marin County became the place that created the solutions? Because the segregation that exists here is great for case study. We actually have the resources and the ability to look at this and approach this from a resource-focused way and say, well, look at what we created here that is working. And some of those ideas that I have, for example, and I have a tendency to focus very much on Black because I'm biracial, but I'm Black biracial, and it just is very natural for me. But there are ways that I know that in dialogue with people who represent the different communities that are marginalized here, this vision can expand to be inclusive. But for me, it's like Black people are less than 3% in this county, and that includes the numbers of San Quentin. This is one of the wealthiest counties in not only one of the wealthiest states, but California is the 5th wealthiest economy in the entire world. Why don't all of us have tax-free homes? I don't understand that. Why don't we have tax-free homes? That's a resource. Not only that, but I also want to bring up the history of segregation and integration. Segregation was created because it was too risky to approach separate but equal. And so I think that there is something beneficial to the idea. And I say this because I'm watching the children die. I'm watching them go into the TAM district, and it's not, you couldn't fix up Marin City to make it pretty enough for these kids to have to deal with what they have to deal with when they're on these campuses with these cultural differences and the violence of supremacy against Black and brown babies and Asian on these campuses. And so I think that there could be some separation, but I've always talked about how homogeny of any sort is dangerous. And Marin City has also got homogeny that is dangerous for Marin City. So I would really, really love to see a boarding school that focuses on Black and brown excellence, that is somewhere in West Marin, that allows mothers to have access to their children while we also microlend for the women of Marin City who have economies, and in the Black market, they're doing hair, they're making plates, they're watching each other's kids, they're doing nails. All of it is happening, but there's no actual economy. And the statistics show that you can change any community by focusing on the women of the community. Women are the center of any community. So if we were to think of it from that model, and we were to be pouring into the women of Marin City, both in terms of resources and microlending, but also in terms of building businesses, but also take care of their children, because it doesn't matter how much money you give me if my child isn't okay. A boarding school which would allow their children to not be too far, so that they could still have interactions with them, but to be well taken care of by Black and brown teachers who can live here because it's been built out in a way that allows them to do that, and be a magnet school for other Black and brown students in California to address the issue of homogeny and access that I feel like African American or students of color in Marin City, they don't get that. They're isolated. They're an island of isolation. That's one idea that I have. I want a Black Hogwarts, basically. And I feel like for the ways that education has failed Black children, especially in the county, that's the only way that you can make up for it, really. And I think we should all be investing in that. And there's some other ones too. Like right now, there's no power. Like I said, we keep going to the table, and even if we say it in love, no matter how we say it, we're still betting on the emotions, and emotions are fickle. I remember when there was all of these calls about integrating the Sausalito Marin City School District after they were deemed segregated. There were all of these concerned parents, white parents from Sausalito, who really were trying to show up and trying to figure out how to be supportive and what do we do. But when people started talking about timelines, and everybody was like, we're going to integrate this school at the end of the school year, those same mothers were like, wait. My child is about to graduate the year after. Can we wait? It's natural for us to be thinking about our primary families. So we can't count on white people in that way. We can't count on the emotions, because the systems have made it to where they're naturally going to, at some point, cross the threshold and want to protect themselves, their resources, because all of it right now from a power defined by this country belongs to them. So it doesn't work. Right. And so in order for us to gain power, the one tool that I believe that we have, and there's so much more I could say about this, and again, this is not something that I have the capacity to organize, but I would love to work with people, is lawsuits. If racism is illegal, which it is, that's our one benefit, racism is illegal, and this county is the most racist in California, then those two things go together. And lawsuits make it impersonal. It isn't me saying you're a bad person. It is me saying this is harm. And the thing about it, what's great about that is that everything that we're asking white people to do with their wealth and try to figure out in this county is basically like asking them to punch themselves. There's something unnatural because unfortunately, all of these systems have designed and created it to be a benefit. But lawsuits is a way that the county, that people who are actively can be the one hitting. And again, I've said this before, I'm not actually talking about violence. I'm just using the hitting as an example of having someone else. If you're hitting yourself, you're just going to be like, I'm not going to do that anymore. If somebody else is hitting you, you're going to move. You're going to do something different. And this county there's no incentive to do anything different.
Right.
So lawsuits are, or the other thing that I've been talking about is that if California is the most racist in California, these lawsuits don't need to necessarily come from people in Marin County. That all the other counties of California should be getting together and pooling their resources to create precedent, to sue Marin County for all of these illegal behaviors, because once any of those lawsuits are won, we now have a new precedent that can affect California and eventually the country in creating models for how we get out of this, if we can ever get out of this.
Right. And I think some of the discussions that are coming out and centering around reparations, unfortunately, if we are using the system to dismantle the system, we're in this position where we're trying to look at the system is made to protect itself. The system is made to continue and perpetuate. Those in power remain in power. Those who have no power, whose resources are being taken, whose labor is being stolen, whose labor is being taken. We want to make sure that that continues. It's very difficult. And so what I'm hearing you say is that when you use lawsuits as a way to call that out, to highlight that, and to redress the wrong, even at that really, and finances is really the base level, because we want to talk about like the physical and the mental and the emotional harm that are being done to communities of color. Like when we look at those, the financial is like the least of these, but if people are dying of illness, as we saw in COVID-19, if people are dying of unclean water due to the utilities that we all pay for not being maintained in these areas where Black and Brown families live, if people are dying of asthma attacks because we have allowed factories to be placed next to their homes, whereas they're being kept from the areas that are wealthy. I hear that lawsuits are a way to call that out and begin to fix that. And I think reparations also has to be thrown into there as well. Yes, please, Amber.
Yes, I mean, the reparations conversation is both good and dangerous to me from the point of view of, because you're right, like we're in the system and we're going to have to use we have to think of things we've never seen before in a certain type of way. And what I'm seeing in a lot of the dialogue right now is to pull from, it's to pull from the supremacy in a supremacist way to address the supremacy. It's not looping. And the fear I have around reparations is, oh, look, we did it. We're finished.
Yeah.
So we all have to be cautionary about that conversation. But because I look at racism as a disease, as an impersonal function of brain, I look at it from a pathology point of view. And most viruses, when you are looking and addressing a virus, you are pulling from the virus in order to address it. And so, or epidemiology, I think that's the word. Last time, okay, good.
You got it.
From an epidemiology point of view, you want to pull from the disease itself to address the disease, but you have to pull the right thing, because otherwise it's just more infection. And I'm not even sure that the law is the right thing, but when I evaluate where we are, what has gotten it to where we're on this call, what has gotten it to where I am not currently a slave, it is illegal to enslave my body. What got us there was law. So
Right.
I'm not praising the law by any means necessary, but I am approaching with curiosity law as the strand. Is that what will, it's because I think everything that we do should be approached with curiosity, that no one can walk into this conversation as if they just know what we're going to do here and that's going to be the solution. Because again, none of us know. No one is unaffected by this disease. Black, brown, white, all of us are infected by these issues and by this disease. And so I'm looking at it from almost a science point of view, an experimental point of view. This is a theory. The theory is that if we take law and we use it to attack resources from the point of view of what has been put in place, then it will open up the dialogue in a way that makes power and makes everything a bit more equitable so that ideas can open up and we can start actually moving the needle.
I like that. I like that. And one of the comments in the chat is there are no broken systems. They are functioning exactly as designed. And that is the case. These laws and these systems that have been put into place have been put into place to maintain superiority, to maintain control, to maintain wealth, to maintain the wealth that has been taken legally by law, stolen and retained by one group. And we're trying to, and as you say, we're trying to find that strand that unravels that addresses that starts to break apart that disease. But that is, like you say, only the beginning. That is only the beginning. Reparations would only be the beginning. It took us 400 years to get here. It will take us probably 400 years to get out of this, but we have yet to start. We've had all of these moments where we could have started and we have chosen to look the other way. We've chosen to divide. And so we keep putting off the start of the correction of this inequity. And so what I'm hearing you say is we need to start looking for ways to dismantle this, using law as a starting point. Maybe not even the best starting point, but it is a starting point, which is what we need. I'm going to ask this question, and then we're going to open it up for questions from our audience today. So Tara, do you feel like, and this is connected to what me and Amber were talking about, do you feel like there's an incremental change for these systems built on white supremacy, or what does it look like if we were to start all over? Like, what would this look like?
Well, I don't think we can start all over, because I do believe in the intergenerational trauma of the colonial experience. I do believe it's something we currently experience, so we can't start all over. I mean, that for me, that doesn't have a sense of logic. But at the same time, I think that I actually fully support what Amber just said about the law. I am a firm believer that we have to use the law to create a new, ANEW. It's not going to be new because we still have our history, but we have to use the law to be able to push that justice forward. And we have to use our voices. And as a white person, we have to speak to each other. I know I said that already. And I think we have to really support reparations in California. I am a believer of AB 3121, although the most recent vote wasn't the best. I think it restricted quite a few of the Black people who live in the state of California from accessing. It was the most conservative interpretation of the law. And so there's a problem right there. I'm a firm believer of educating all of our youth, not just our Black and brown and immigrant youth, but all our youth, to become stewards of our communities. And I think another thing Amber said that I really agree with is our kids are angry. You know, all of our kids are angry. I was angry. And all the generations to this day are angry. They know that something isn't right. And I think it's really important for parents and guardians and caretakers in Marin County to look at their own families and ask what's happening. You know, what is happening here, and stop looking away, stop turning away from the reality of the Marin experience. So I don't necessarily think we can start like it has never happened. But I think that really supporting individuals who come forward who are leaders of color in our communities. We need a board of supervisor. We need a supervisor who's a person of color. You know, I mean, I can't scream that from I want to scream that from the top of the mountain. You know, we need people in place and we need to support leaders of color in every part of our Marin community. Right. You know, and we also need to be honest about the way we're policed in Marin County, and who's being policed and who's in our jails, and what those percentages are to what the percentages of color are in our county. You know, because it's astounding. What we're talking about is data driven. This isn't made up. This is data driven. We've got people who are looking inward now from outside of the county. And so it's time to pull up our big girl pants and amplify the truth of this experience. And so, you know, again, I think that, you know, moving forward, I think we have to, as white people, decolonize our mind, look inward at our own truths, and do a deep dive into why, how, what, and who we are turning our backs on.
Yeah, that was one of the quotes that came to me as you were saying that, is that this is a question of will. It's not a question of means, it's a question of will. Are you willing to do what it takes to dismantle these systems of poverty that are based on race? And I think what we've seen is, especially from the race counts data, that Marin is very capable. I mean, we have the most capacity to make these changes, but every time the hand is moved to go make those changes, the will fails. The hand is retracted. There's no change that happens because that system wants to keep perpetuating itself. That illness wants to continue to multiplying and dividing and making ill. And so we're left with the people who, you know, and I think the quote from the woman from Marin City is so good. The people who care can't change it, and the people who can change it don't care. You know, that's the part that we need to fix. The people who can change it need to care. I would like to open this up for the last few minutes for questions from the audience. If you have questions, you can pop them into the chat. And we would love to use this time to talk more about some of the questions that people have. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for those to populate, Amber, please feel free. I would love to hear more from you.
I just have one thought I want to add to Tara's statement, or to the question about whether we start over or whether we work with, you know, with where we are. And I think we all have to try to work with where we are. But I do think that there is a place where the choice of whether we start over is going to be taken away from us if we don't address this soon. Because I have a lecture where I can directly tie racism to global warming. That as a species, our ability to dehumanize our closest kin, each other, is also a part of why we have been able to disassociate ourselves so deeply from the earth. And it has had it's having a profound effect. And we will, if we don't address this issue, this primal issue, we won't address that issue. And all of it will eventually get to a place where we were starting over, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
We will destroy the planet. So.
Absolutely. Okay, I see Lisa. I see your hand raised. Do you mind putting that, typing it into the chat? Oh no, she doesn't have chat capabilities. Okay, let's see. Can we unmute her? Let's see.
Yep, you did.
Okay.
Thank you. You unmuted me. The chat is disabled.
Oh, is
So
it really?
So maybe there's a way you can enable that chat.
Yes, we can.
There it is. All right,
All
I can put my question in.
Okay, thank you so much. Does anybody else have questions? And I'm very excited, Amber, about watching the Clarity documentary when that comes out. I'm the mom of biracial kids as well, and seeing their struggle, because as you say, Marin is a microcosm of California, of the United States, and some of the same issues that we're seeing, the opioid epidemic and the confusion and the trouble that we're having across the board, it's being reflected everywhere. The racism is a disease that continues to impoverish and tear down our families. Can you tell us about like kind of where you are in the filmmaking process, Amber, and kind of what your needs are moving forward?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Actually, we are one scene away. I think I mentioned next month I'm traveling with my mother and my older sister to my mother's homeland in Utah, where I've arranged to sit with family that has a legacy of harm and a legacy of racism to look for the healing. And that's the last scene that we will be filming. And then the Apo Bazidi and Cassidy Friedman, who are both award-winning documentary filmmakers that I am working with on this, will go into the production and editing, and they're doing as much in-house as possible, but we are still fundraising for the film. We're fundraising currently for some of the things that are going to be outside of their scope, like the specialized lighting and sound and some of the production needs and the distribution needs that we'll be working on. And I think, Rashida, you have a link, and maybe with the books we can put to the landing page where what we're looking for is both donations, but also ambassadors of the film. So there's lots and lots of ways that people can get involved. Some of what has been happening is different people have been hosting talks where they invite me to come and show that clip into their home or into their church or into some space of community where I can come and we can discuss these topics in a really vulnerable. There's actually a scene in the film where you can see we filmed one of those conversations. And in that that's part of how we've been doing our fundraising, is then the next person, kind of like what it reminds me of is like the old Tupperware parties. Like everybody is bringing us over to have these conversations and also to find other ways to get involved. We have one of the best film festivals here in Mill Valley, but our goal is to have this film done, to be submitting it to Sundance in December.
Fantastic. And I think I'm thinking that some of the questions that I'm seeing popping up here in the chat, that what you're saying there could be an answer to that. We have a question here. This is a great conversation. Where are there places in Marin where these kinds of conversations can continue? I think that's a great question. Amber, Tara, do you have any insight into that? Where are these conversations happening in your lives, and where would you invite people to have those conversations?
Do you want to go first?
I mean, you know, truthfully, I feel like there aren't a lot of these conversations happening in Marin. And, you know, this is essentially groundbreaking work in a way that Rashida and Serge are doing in the hopes to get this kind of messaging out there and these conversations started. I'd love to invite, I think, is that Mary or Lisa who wrote that? Come to my house. I mean, I want to start these conversations on my lawn, you know, that's what I mean. Like, this is, you know, these are the conversations that hopefully inspire, you know, from my perspective, my white perspective, more white people talking about this freely, without fear, without the care of judgment from others. Yeah. With their friends in their communities. This has to happen. Not because we're being asked to, but because this is a issue, the issue of poverty, the issue of racism, the interconnection, the issue of colonialism. This is our issue. Yeah. We own this issue equally, if not maybe more, you know. To deconstruct, to start the conversations, to really initiate them and have that courage to do so. Doing that, I think will spread like wildfire. So it's my hope that in coming forward and showing my face and saying these words and kind of calling out people like the Archdiocese or, you know, the Marin Independent Journal or the Marin County Board of Supervisors. Hey, listen, you need to have these conversations too. Yeah. It's not just Amber and I and Rashida and Serge. It's all of us because we're interconnected. And I really agree with what you said earlier about climate change. It's going to restart everything. And it is directly linked to colonialism and to our current conversation of racism and poverty and all of these little pieces of this greater puzzle. But yeah, I think the conversations start with us. And if you have a forum that you'd like us to show up to, I'm there because I have the fire to do this. And I actually am taking the LSATs in June and hopefully again in the fall, because I also believe that the law is the way that we are going to be able to enact social change. So if you're an activist, get a degree and you know, change jobs, because this is how we're going to make, you know, change in our communities together and to support one another. We are interconnected.
Absolutely. And I do want to say for the person who asked the question, yes, Surge is actually a great place to connect and have those have not just the conversations, but to get the tools to begin to take those conversations out into your community, into your friend groups, into your circles of influence. So we want to make sure that that happens. Next question. I wonder if you can speak to the connection as well between gun violence and racism. How is it that every issue that is killing all of us, but most importantly, Black and Brown people, can continue to be ignored? How can I convince my friends that these issues affect every one of us? Amber, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, but before that, can I respond to the first question?
Yes, please.
Mostly by agreeing that there is nowhere, but this conversation happens everywhere I go. I am a public speaker. I do have a website, which Rashida, you also hopefully will have to be able to put up. I can
Absolutely.
be booked to come in and have these conversations. I definitely specialize in particular topics, but my focus is building the empathy. My focus is having these conversations in ways that get us all thinking and healing and on our own personal paths. I also do life coaching, and I did not intend for this, but I am getting hired by a lot of white people who want to unpack, because the conversations publicly are so at this time reactive. and there can be a lot of canceling, so it doesn't always feel safe. So I am at this time also working, but all of this has to be curated in order to make sure that I'm safe in the work. But
Right.
I am also holding space to unpack and do some of the work individually, but that's limited. So those are two things that are available, which you can find on my website.
Okay, we will have links to that as well. We'll send that out to everyone who registered for this event. Will get all of these links. So don't be worried, everyone. All of these links are coming, so you'll be able to connect with further resources.
And then now the question.
And then the gun violence question. So why is it that we're keep looking away every time these incidents of extreme gun violence happen?
Because we've made a habit of it. The violence of this nation. I think that's the poem that I read that Lisa said, which thank you for, inspired the land acknowledgement, but is talking about the place where on one hand I grieve every baby, I grieve every situation, but at the same time none of it is new.
Right.
That you have to, as a country, we have to remember that Black babies were literally stolen from the arms of their mothers to be fed for crocodile bait.
Yeah.
Like our entire history with this country is violent towards children and ignoring children. We have had cages at the border with babies that have been taken from their parents for how long?
1000%.
History of ignoring. But here's the thing is that there's been warnings this entire time that there is no separation. But it's almost unbelievable is that there as if we've created, it's just like, I like to look at things through nature and through ourselves, because there's mirrors. We're all only mirrors of each other. And the microcosm of my experience is actually the macrocosm of all of our experience. And you can see these patterns in everything. And when you think about it, if it's like working out. What habits you create in your life then shape your thinking. If you don't work out, you feel bad. But if you work out, you feel good. And that feel good starts to shape your thoughts, and your thoughts start to shape your actions. And then your actions start to shape how you show up in your life. And then that is how your life is shaped. Well, as a nation, we have shaped habits around violence. We have shaped habits around ignoring and not paying attention to and not reacting. White people didn't think that it was going to affect them, because that's another disease. That's another part of the disease, is that white people have not had to experience, but we've been in this for a long time.
Yes.
The violence is new to you, but it isn't new to us. Our babies have been dying for a long time. So it's almost a welcome to the party. And I'm sorry to be coy, or I'm sorry that that's harsh, but there's no separation, because we have to make new habits. We have to make new habits in how we address these things. That's how I'm talking to people about the gun violence.
Right. Until we start moving forward. I love that analogy of the working out. Until we start moving forward, until we actually get off the couch and start getting onto that, whatever, taking that walk, going on that treadmill, and we start to get that feel good. Because we're talking about, the pleasure centers of our brain, and wealth feels good. Okay, I got this for free. This is great. Okay, I can enslave these people, and then my family set up for centuries. This is great. So that is being fed, and then we're now needing to start triggering new and creating new pathways for doing justice feels good. Watching my community go from blight to everyone is happy and healthy and has what they need, that feels good. We need to put that into practice. Go ahead.
I love that you brought the brain into this, because this is brain, but this isn't even just pleasure. We're talking primal. That when we talk about slavery, when we talk about the big house, when we talk about what it was for a parent to raise a child in that environment, where you're often having 50 to a couple hundred people that you are violently suppressing on your land, but it's just you and your family. In order to do that, you have to create pathways of fear. Yeah. You have to tell your children, you can't befriend that little Black boy. You have to be the master. These things are primal. So we're not even talking about pleasure. We're talking about an indoctrination that has told you that has told white people that being superior is about their safety, that protecting their home, protecting their properties is about safety. That's part of why the lawsuits are important, because we have to attack the primal, not just the pleasure. We have to say, actually, being racist is what is going. That's part of why, because even conceptually, that racism and affecting the planet is still conceptual until we all feel it in a certain kind of way, and we don't want it. We don't want to get that far. So, this is primal. This is your survival. Your survival is in finding a way to heal yourself so that we can all be unified. That's. I love the brain.
I'm loving everything you're saying. This. I wish this conversation could keep going. I'm gonna really quick try to get through these other questions that I see. Let's see. Thank you, Amber, Tara, and Rashida for a wonderful discussion. It seems that individualism and comfort seem relevant in Marin go together. Do you see any openings with white residents and leaders to encourage vulnerability and connection? Tara, do you want to try to take that? I know you talked a little bit about that.
Do I see vulnerability and connection being at the forefront of our white leaders currently? I mean,
do you see any openings for that to happen?
For it? Well, I'm hoping that the more conversations like this we have, and the more people that are having these types of conversations, and the more documentaries like Amber's that are coming out that really speak to the Marin experience, help educate and increase a sense of understanding amongst existing white Marin leaders. I don't know if there's a lot of vulnerability at this moment. I don't want to be negative, but I don't know, you know. I working on 1185 as part of the working group, there were quite a few experiences in that process where I realized at the county level, I had a much higher expectation for practice and process.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, you know, speaking to that a little bit, like just recently, I found out that the chief of police in Santa Fe didn't understand the origin of policing in America. Ooh. And that it's rooted in slave patrols. And I was really surprised by that.
Wow.
You know, so there's a lot of work that has to be done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of being vulnerable on all sides of the camps that needs to happen.
Yeah. And a lot of education, it seems that we're missing.
And that education comes from these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think on that note, we are going to call it a day. We actually went over, but the conversation was too good to stop. We appreciate every one of you. Thank you for joining us here today. I want to say a special thank you to our panelists, Amber Allen Pearson, Tara Evans. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to Serge, who has helped support these really important conversations, and the folks there who are doing the work and who are helping to bring in others to do the work. I think that's how we start. This is how we move forward. I want to have a special thank you to the Friends of the Marin County Library who are supporting this and who continue to help make these programs happen. And the people of Marin. I thank you for joining in with us, and hopefully, I hope that we've inspired you to continue pushing for equity across the board throughout Marin County so that everyone can live in a just, equitable, and safe, healthy world. That is our goal. And it starts with education. It starts with those gut checks, those mind checks. and the education of knowing where we've come from and where we want to go. So we appreciate each of you. To our speakers, please stick around so we can just debrief very quickly. But other than that, we're going to close the room. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.